Hello, and welcome back to today's episode, where we are keeping with the theme of one of my more recent videos from the tail end of last week on the riots by far-right activists across the UK that is still occurring and still ongoing. And by this point, if you're watching this and you're immediately offended by me applying the term far-right, owing to the events over the last few days, anybody who is turning up to events planned by, I'll be kind, right-leaning activists tonight, I would argue are only turning up for one particular outcome, and that is violence, because that is what has been the theme over the last few days, and that is what is to be expected by any attendance at those events tonight. So I will keep with that. If you feel offended by that, be offended. Snowflake. Right. So we're going to keep with the far-right activists and their necessity to keep holding these violent gatherings. But what I want to do here, and I really want to know if you're still watching this video by now a few seconds in, let me know in the comments, because I want to know your opinion. What I'm going to address in this video is basically the question: are these riots a case of is it a moral panic about immigration? So in this episode, I'm going to explore whether these riots are really about immigration, or if they reflect maybe other or deeper issues, or rather, is that issue of immigration in and of itself, is that a legitimate concern for these people and for others as well who are, not in attendance at these riots. So we'll explore whether these riots are really about immigration, or if this claim of immigration is a bad thing is warranting of the exhibitions of violence that we've seen over the last few nights. So we're going to examine this issue of immigration against the backdrop of moral panic and explore the evidence around claims about immigrants. But first, we're going to have to understand what moral panic actually means. So this theoretical concept, it refers to an exaggerated or irrational fear. Collective, exaggerated and irrational fear, I should say, that something or someone poses a great threat to societal values, interests, safety. There's a couple of sociologists that you've probably never heard of, so I'm not going to... Good and Ben Yuda, Eric Good and Neckman Ben Yuda, who first proposed 5 key characteristics, a bit of a tick sheet for measuring or trying to identify if societal fear that is being experienced at a given time about a given issue, about a given group, is justified, or if it is a moral panic, if that fear is disproportionate to the reality of the problem and the so-called problem group. So these characteristics, there are 5 of them. We've got concern, we've got consensus, disproportionality, hostility, and volatility. So concern, it's a heightened awareness. It's the identification of issues that are to be addressed. Okay, so the majority of us in a moral panic are concerned about particular issues, and we highlight what these issues are, and then we try to assess these issues measurably, so we can actually demonstrate whether or not that fear or that concern is justifiable. Consensus merely means that there needs to be, broadly speaking, a consensus by a significant number of people in a community or of a society that those concerns identified are legitimate. So whether the concerns are justifiable or not, there needs to be a consensus. There needs to be enough people on board to agree that those concerns are worthy of time and attention. Again, that doesn't need to be matching the reality, but it just needs to be enough people. And that is a moving goalpost. because the next question is, well, how many is enough? And it can vary. But nevertheless, there needs to be enough people on board to say that, yeah, you know what, those concerns, we agree they need to be addressed. Disproportionality is the response to this threat. And it needs to be out of proportion. It needs to be above and beyond what is actually required to the reality of the threat or to the reality of the issue at hand. There needs to be demonstrable hostility towards a targeted group, because there has to be a so-called folk devil, a demonized group who are at fault, shall we say. And that, again, might not be, often isn't, or it can't be, by the definition of moral panic, steeped in reality. It has to be above and beyond. So there has to be notable hostility shown towards a particular group. And then volatility. Normally moral panics are, and again, this is a bit of a move on goalpost in terms of how long, but moral panic is quite, at its peak, short-lived. There can be growing animosity. There can be a bit of a decline in animosity. But moral panics are, by a measurable, they are measurably, they have a spike in concerns, in hostility. And it can be, relatively speaking, it's short-lived. But for this episode, because there's 5 and I don't really want to focus on 5, I want to focus on concern and I want to focus on disproportionality. Right now, at the minute, time will tell on volatility, how long this lasts for. But I would imagine it's going to be these riots and what have you. They're going to be relatively short-lived. That doesn't mean to say that everything's going to be calm and everyone's going to get along after this, but it means that these riots, they won't last forever. They will be, relatively speaking, a flash in the pan. So I would imagine over the course of the next few days, couple of weeks, maybe tops, volatility will be demonstrable. Hostility, absolutely, is there right now to be seen. And there is consensus. Thankfully, from what I'm seeing, there's not a unanimous consensus. It is a mixed bag. This is quite divisive, or the concerns that are being raised are quite divisive, because not everybody who agrees will be in these protests, but there are going to be a large number of people who do nevertheless agree with the concerns being raised by those who are exhibiting violence at the minute. So consensus, I would say, has been met, because there is a significant number of the populace who are on board with the, not necessarily the violence, but the concerns espoused by those who again are on the sort of the so-called front lines of this movement at the minute. So I want to focus on concern and disproportionality, and just consider some of the far-right claims and the evidence maybe against them or to support them. So the first is that immigrants maybe, don't know if this is in ranked order, for you as a viewer, some of these claims might be, one might be higher above the other. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to address the claims that I would normally see being espoused by, why people would be against immigration, or why they might be in support of the actions that are currently ongoing, or the movement in general, if it's from a more peaceful position. And number one that I'm going to address is that immigrants, generally speaking, get better treatment than British natives. And we can talk about Irish natives as well, because there's going to be a bit of a yin and yang. This movement it has reached Belfast, of course, and similar, not to the same extent, but we have seen outbreaks of mass violence in areas of the Republic of Ireland, namely Dublin as well. There have been other areas, of course, so we can extend this to the Irish Republic as well. And on this notion that immigrants get better treatment than British natives, for relation to housing, that immigrants get better or easier access to housing than natives of the British Isles. Contrary to popular belief, immigrants, they don't receive preferential treatment for social housing. The allocation of housing is based on needs. It's not based on nationality. Many immigrants live in private rented accommodations, which, they're often substandard, and that's true of their private accommodation once in the British population. It is also very true about the housing that they are receiving in these so-called 4-star hotels, which they're not. They're being put up in hotels or former buildings that have been formerly used as hotels. Those hotels have been bought out, and all of the so-called or perceived luxuries that people like to think that refugees, for example, are receiving, they're not there. So what would make a hotel a 4-star hotel is not there. They're basically holding units, and there's plenty of research to back up just how poorly kept and dire the living conditions are there. So when it comes to housing, myth busted. They're not getting preferential treatment. That just doesn't happen. Are we on a shortage of housing? Yes, we absolutely are. Who should you blame? Not the people coming over, the actual successive governments since the 1980s in particular, for deliberately not building enough social housing. You should look there first and foremost. When it comes to healthcare and this myth that immigrants get better treatment, immigrants are subject to an immigrant, a surcharge, health surcharge, which contributes to the overall annual NHS budget. I can't speak for the Republic of Ireland on this one, but certainly in the United Kingdom, immigrants who come here are at the mercy. They are expected to pay that surcharge. They do not have preferential treatment either to healthcare services. Immigrants are not seen before British natives. The issues with the NHS at the minute, again, are down to, in particular, 14 years of dire underfunding, well below inflation by the Tory government. Labour privatised, New Labour, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown's New Labour privatised many parts of the NHS as well. I'm not ignorant to that. So they've chipped into it, they've contributed in a different way to the problems that we see now. These are legacy issues in terms of welfare benefits and preferential treatment that immigrants are supposed to get over British natives. Non-EU immigrants have limited access to benefits, often dependent on their visa status. And the idea that immigrants receive more benefits, it is a myth. Like I always say in these videos, because I hope in doing these for the foreseeable, we will explore this, no doubt, as a specific issue in a future episode. But for now, if you do have evidence to the contrary, that immigrants, non-EU immigrants in particular, receive preferential treatment when it comes to welfare benefits, please put that in evidence in the comments section. I would genuinely like to see it. When addressing claims that immigrants are a drain to the economy, so we've addressed a few things there on preferential treatment. Let's look at immigrants being a drain to the economy. Very bluntly, let's look at the economic contribution. Numerous studies show that immigrants contribute more in taxes than they take out in benefits. They play a crucial role in a labour market that is, it necessitates consistent growth because immigrants fill gaps in the labour market. They bring in skills that the British natives simply just don't have or don't have in abundance, and this supports economic growth. It's almost as if you could magically click your fingers tomorrow if you wanted all immigrants to leave, and if that was your wish and that happened, you're probably going to tank the economy. And I'm not an economist, I'm a criminologist, but for what I know and for what I understand, and if I'm wrong, tell me in the comments. But you can't have fewer working people and expect a strong and growing economy. And whether you like it or not, we need more people, and we need more skilled people. We've got many a sector, even just going back to the NHS, that is struggling through a lack of an adequate workforce. So we need to bear that in mind. It's kind of, you can't have both. You can't have net zero migration and have a strong and functional growing economy. I might be wrong on that. Please do again tell me. When it comes to public services, and immigrants being a drain on these, immigrants contribute significantly to the provision of public services. We always point to the NHS. There are others, but let's focus on the NHS because they are the biggest contributors to that particular sector. Particularly NHS, and I suppose we can extend to other social care services as well, which without them, drastically understaffed. I would hope that that point is already well known, even by those who maybe don't even like immigration, but I hope you would see the numerical, the stats are there, the numerical benefit of immigrants within healthcare services that, unless you are minted, you're probably going to be in need of, because we in the United Kingdom are very accustomed to a tax-paid, tax-funded NHS at the first, the drop of a hat, you receive care type of service, not insurance policy setup that other countries around the world have adopted. So we need that. We need people here to support that fundamental service. It is the crown jewel of the United Kingdom, shall we say. Let's move on. Immigrants bring crime and terrorism. Again, a key focus for my research as a criminologist to date. So I'm going to keep this one very, very brief because, again, there's going to be plenty more content where I address this in the future. With regards to crime rates, I addressed this last week. Research shows no consistent link between immigration and increased crime. In fact, there's actual areas where higher immigration areas with higher immigration, concentrated higher immigration, often experience lower rates of crime. Now, that is a contested sort of bit of research, because there's plenty as well that shows that social disorganization breeds areas of crime in a kind of areas with high turnover of a population. It dampens or it corrupts the ability for social cohesion to take place, which is a supporting mechanism of lawful behaviour. Plenty of theories too indicate that higher immigration can breed areas of crime. However, there's also research we need to acknowledge that shows and brings evidence to show the opposite. So, bit of a mixed bag on that one. But overall, generally speaking, immigration isn't in and of itself linked solely to crime on the basis of one's ethnicity or one's race or one's religion, because when we talk about immigration, those are the kind of variables then that are directly linked. So there's no evidence of those. Or basically, there's not a lot that's in the minority. When it comes to terrorism more specifically, most terrorist incidences in the United Kingdom have been committed by UK-born individuals. And the link between immigration and terrorism, the so-called Trojan horse that we've seen a lot of in media and political rhetoric in the lead up to Brexit in 2015 and 16 specifically, is weak and often exaggerated. Not just my own research has found that, but plenty of others as well. But that did not stop those who were championing, those who were pushing the Brexit narrative very, very strongly in the mid-2010s. Another claim that immigrants don't integrate into British society, it kind of stems off all of those points that I've mentioned before. Many immigrants actively contribute to British society by their work ethic, their contributions to the NHS, by extension of that, their taxable income that goes into the pot for social services and everything else that we fund publicly. They engage in community activities. They require language skills. I know Nigel Farage likes to pump this myth that the majority of people in certain areas are deliberately non-British speaking. Again, evidence goes against that claim. Successful integration stories are in abundance, and they highlight a positive impact of immigration. You see this all the time. You see this as well, even just in the Olympics. It's one of those events that brings out examples of athletes, British representatives, performing great or performing positively on the international stage, and who have a great story behind them, where they can say that they themselves or their parents came to the United Kingdom seeking a better life, and have done that and contributed meaningfully to British society. So look, whilst these claims about immigration, they are largely, at the best of times, unfounded, but most times that there's an argument to be had against them. Absolutely, an evidence-led argument to be had against them. I personally believe, and I do research and try and argue, that the real issues lie elsewhere. For me, decades of neoliberalist policies, they've corroded public services and widened drastically inequality in the United Kingdom, and this has created fertile ground for misplaced blame on immigrants. And this is, it's been long happening, this. For me, predominantly, particularly if we talk about the concentrated hostility against minority Muslim communities. This has been ongoing for, the best part of a quarter of a decade, quarter of a century, since 9/11. It's been a hotbed and often justification for the creation of moral panic to justify, or at least turn the public gaze away from what has been quite aggressive and ruthless neoliberalist policies in the United Kingdom, particularly during the era of the Conservatives and austerity. So this has created fertile ground then for misplaced blame on immigrants. It's been elite engineered for the most part. So austerity measures, and it wasn't just the last 14 years, but since the 1980s, and particularly post-2008 and that financial crisis, the UK has experienced significant cuts to public services across successive governments due to austerity policies. And these cuts the evidence is blatant. They've strained the NHS, they've strained education services and local services as well. Closures of youth services, public libraries, the list goes on. They've impacted the quality and the availability of services for citizens. And it shouldn't be a shock to highlight that the strain on these services, the closure in an abundance of cases, has put strains and worsened the quality of life for those who are in most need in our society. Privatisation under neoliberalist policies has led to the privatisation of many of these sectors, no longer under public ownership, and this has reduced accessibility and affordability of essential services. When it comes to income disparity, the gap between the wealthy and the rest of the population, again, widens significantly. The top 10% of earners have seen disproportionate income growth compared to the bottom 50%, if not more. Job insecurity. Neoliberalist policies have promoted deregulation, leading to an increase of job insecurity and the so-called rise of a gig economy. Gone is the days that you can have a secure job for life, so to speak, and many people feel economically vulnerable because of this. Nothing to do with immigrants, that is political ideology. When it comes to affordable housing, or rather unaffordable housing, neoliberalist policies have contributed to a housing market where demand far, far exceeds supply, driving up prices and rents. And this goes back to the Thatcher era, policies that were implemented to sell off the publicly owned social housing and to drastically reduce the building of new houses to replace those being sold off. Sure, people who were in receipt of social housing were able to buy at a reduced price, but that was kind of for the there and then population who were able to basically grasp that opportunity. The implementation of policy that would reduce the funding to local councils to build more housing to replace those, that's pretty much a big factor in screwing over the ability for younger generations now, and even young generations, basically millennials and those generations coming through, to get on the housing ladder. So this has led to increased homelessness. And again, if you want to look at statistics on homelessness over the last 14, 15 years, go to shelter.co.uk or is it .com, one of the two, and look at their statistics on the rocketing figures in homelessness over the last 10 to 15 years. And in terms of stepping maybe one step back going one step back from homelessness, just housing insecurity, that in itself has again, in the term, just tenfold risen under an era of neoliberalist austerity. Again, not immigrations, not the fault of immigrants. This is the fault of a lack of responsibility for housing under successive governments. And I'm fixating on this point just a little bit because housing is, I think, one of the biggest at the minute, and it has been for a while, one of the biggest issues for British people that hasn't been addressed. When it comes to community strains, what more can I say, really? Economic pressures and reduced public investment, they have strained community cohesion, making it easier for divisive narratives to take root. Because, of course, those who are in support of aggressive neoliberalism, those who are in charge, and we're in a country that is saturated in right-leaning media that is, still is supportive of conservative governments and those who are further to the right of the political spectrum. When you have narratives when you have entities that are in charge who are supportive of these types of economic policies, then the narrative will shift away from those policies towards other blameworthy groups. And this brings me back to moral panic. So when we talk about the concerns of those who are going to be on the news tonight, causing damage to communities, to their communities most likely, around the United Kingdom, because there is somewhere, according to reports, anywhere at the minute that I can see between 30 to 100 protests planned. They're going to be, by their logic, there and doing what they're doing because of the concerns that I've highlighted, and probably more highlighted in this video. However, they are contentious, if not directly unsupported. And what we need to remember then is that they are likely to be getting their information from sources who are all for the current economic ideology. So look, whilst far-right activists point to immigration as the root of societal issues, the evidence suggests otherwise. So the characteristics of moral panic, and again particularly concerning disproportionality, are evident in these narratives. However, the deeper issues, they lie with those economic and social policies that have shaped the United Kingdom over the last few decades, and neoliberalism's coercive and corrosive impact on public services and inequality is a real challenge. It is the real challenge that we must address, and we also need to address the narratives that are there to support them, those from political entities, and I include the current Labour government, albeit they've only been in charge for a month. We can't blame them for too much at the minute, but they aren't putting anything forward that's going to change it either. Again, if we snapped our fingers and all immigrants vanished from the United Kingdom by tomorrow morning, you're still going to be left with a government that champions, holds up, supports, implements an economic ideology that is vastly in favour for those who are already in vastly wealthy positions in society. So the issue for us, in my opinion, stretches much, much further than immigration. Okay, so that's my 2 cents in this extended video. Do let me know your thoughts once more in the comments. I do appreciate anything that comes in, whether or not I actively address it by or address it meaningfully in the comments. I still read them. I still try and engage with them if I can, and I do like to know what you guys are thinking and to see if there's any flaws in my logic. So do try your best to address those constructively if you can. And as always, thanks for turning in, and I will see you again next time.